Stop calling me. I do not need you anymore. 8 words. That was all it took to change the way I saw my son forever. The message arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning while I was standing in my kitchen making coffee. Sunlight streamed through the window above the sink. The radio played softly in the background. It should have been an ordinary day. Instead, it became the day my heart finally stopped making excuses. My name is Margaret Bennett. I am 70 years old, a widow, and the mother of a man named Ryan. For most of my life, being his mother was the role I treasured most. I still remember the day he was born. I remember teaching him to ride a bicycle. I remember helping him study for exams, comforting him after disappointments, and sitting through countless baseball games when the summer heat felt unbearable. When his father passed away, Ryan was only 19. We leaned on each other through those difficult years. At least, I thought we did. My phone buzzed again. I looked down expecting another message. There was nothing. Just those 8 words staring back at me from the screen. Stop calling me. I do not need you anymore. I read them once. Then again. Then a third time. The coffee machine finished brewing, but I forgot to pour a cup. I simply stood there staring at my phone until the screen dimmed and went dark. The strange thing was that the message did not arrive out of nowhere. If I was being honest with myself, there had been signs for years. Ryan returned my calls less often. Family dinners became rare. Birthdays felt rushed. Holidays felt scheduled rather than shared. Every time I noticed the distance growing, I found a reason to explain it away. He is busy. He is stressed. He is focused on work. He has responsibilities. A mother can build an entire castle out of excuses when she loves her child enough. I picked up my coffee and sat at the kitchen table. Across from me stood a framed photograph taken 7 years earlier. Ryan was smiling with his arm around his wife, Nicole. Their daughter, Chloe, stood between them holding a birthday cake. Looking at that picture, I tried to connect the man in the photograph with the man who had just told me he no longer needed me. The connection felt harder than it should have. Part of me wanted to call immediately, to ask what happened, to ask why he was angry, to ask if he truly meant those words. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the table. I did nothing. Around noon, I went for my usual walk through the neighborhood. The weather was pleasant. Children rode bicycles. Neighbors worked in their gardens. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet everything felt slightly different. It was as if someone had quietly changed the color of the sky, and only I could see it. Several times during the walk, I reached into my pocket to check my phone. No new messages appeared. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. That evening, I opened an old photo album. I had not looked through it in years. Page after page showed moments from Ryan's childhood. School pictures, family vacations, Christmas mornings. There was one photograph that made me stop. Ryan was 10 years old. He had lost a soccer game and sat on the grass trying not to cry. I remembered kneeling beside him after that picture was taken. I remembered telling him that losing did not make him less valuable. I remembered him wrapping his arms around me and saying, "I do not know what I would do without you, Mom." The memory hurt more than the text message. Not because children change, because somewhere along the way, we stopped recognizing each other. Later that night, my phone lit up again. My heart jumped. For a moment, I thought Ryan had changed his mind. Instead, it was a promotional message from a grocery store. I laughed softly at myself. Then I turned off the screen and placed the phone on the nightstand. Before going to sleep, I made a decision. I would not call him. I would not argue. I would not beg for a place in his life. If Ryan truly wanted distance, I would give it to him. What I did not know then was that the silence about to begin would last exactly 2 months. And before those 2 months were over, my phone would ring in the middle of the night, and the son who claimed he did not need me would be the one asking for help. The first week passed more quietly than I expected. Every morning I woke up, made coffee, and glanced at my phone before I could stop myself. Every morning, there was nothing from Ryan. No apology. No explanation. Not even a simple mistake text sent to the wrong person. Just silence. At first, the silence hurt. Then it became routine. Human beings can adapt to almost anything, even heartbreak. Especially heartbreak that arrives slowly. By the second week, I stopped carrying my phone from room to room. I left it on the kitchen counter while I worked in the garden. I left it on the coffee table while I watched television in the evenings. Sometimes hours passed before I checked it. Each time the screen remained empty, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because my son seemed determined to erase me from his life. Relief, because I no longer had to wonder where I stood. The answer was painfully clear. One afternoon, while trimming roses in my backyard, my neighbor Carol leaned over the fence and asked if I wanted to join a community book club that met every Thursday evening. Normally, I would have declined. For years, most of my schedule revolved around family. If Ryan needed something, I wanted to be available. If Chloe had a school event, I rearranged my plans. If Nicole hosted a gathering, I kept my calendar open. But standing there beneath the warm summer sun, I realized nobody was asking for my availability anymore. Sure, I said. Carol looked pleasantly surprised. Really? I laughed softly. Why not? That small decision changed more than I expected. The book club introduced me to people I would never have met otherwise. Retired teachers, former business owners, widows, grandparents, people with stories, struggles, and experiences of their own. Every Thursday evening, we sat around a large wooden table at the local library discussing books and life. For the first time in years, I found myself talking about things that had nothing to do with Ryan. The realization felt both liberating and heartbreaking. During the third week, I noticed another change. I stopped rereading the text message. In the beginning, I looked at it constantly, searching for hidden meaning. Maybe he was angry. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe something else happened. Eventually, I understood that the words meant exactly what they said. Stop calling me. I do not need you anymore. The truth was painful, but it was also simple. One Saturday morning, I opened a closet in my hallway and found several boxes filled with old family memorabilia. For hours, I sorted through photographs, school projects, and holiday decorations. Near the bottom of one box, I found a handmade card Chloe had given me when she was 8 years old. The front read, "Best Grandma Ever." Inside, she had drawn a picture of us baking cookies together. Looking at that card, I felt a lump form in my throat. I had not heard from Chloe since Ryan's text message. Not once. That realization hurt more than I wanted to admit. By the 6th week, summer was beginning to fade. The evenings arrived earlier. The air felt slightly cooler. My life had settled into a new rhythm. Morning walks, gardening, book club, lunches with friends. I was not happy exactly, but I was no longer waiting. There is a difference. Waiting keeps your eyes fixed on a closed door. Living requires you to turn around and notice the rest of the world. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, nearly 2 months after Ryan's message, I was sitting on my porch reading when my phone buzzed. My heart jumped instinctively. For a moment, I hated that reaction. I picked up the phone and looked at the screen. It was not Ryan. It was Chloe. Just one sentence. "Grandma, I miss you." I stared at those 4 words for a long time. Then another message appeared. "I am sorry." My hands trembled slightly. Before I could decide how to respond, a third message arrived. "Dad does not know I am texting you." For the first time in 8 weeks, I felt the story shifting. Whatever had happened inside Ryan's house, whatever had convinced him he no longer needed me, it was not as simple as I once believed. And somewhere behind the silence, something was beginning to crack. For several minutes, I stared at Chloe's messages without responding. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across my porch, and somewhere in the distance a lawn mower hummed softly. Ordinary sounds, ordinary moments. Yet my heart was racing. 2 months of silence had taught me not to react too quickly. Still, seeing my granddaughter's name on my screen felt like finding a light in a room I thought had gone dark. Eventually, I typed a simple reply. "I miss you too." The response came almost immediately. "Can we talk?" I hesitated only a second before pressing the call button. Chloe answered on the first ring. "Grandma." Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "Hi, sweetheart." Silence followed. Then I heard her sniffle. "I am sorry." The words came out quickly, as though she had been holding them in for weeks. "You have nothing to apologize for," I said gently. "I should have called sooner." "Chloe." My voice softened. "Whatever is happening, it is not your responsibility." Another silence. Then she asked the question I had been asking myself for months. Why did Dad send that message? I looked out across the yard. Leaves had begun changing color. Summer was ending. "I do not know," I admitted. "Do you?" Chloe hesitated. "Not completely." Her answer surprised me. "What do you mean?" Things started changing before the message. I sat up straighter. "Tell me." What followed was not one dramatic revelation. It was something more believable, more painful, a collection of small moments. Ryan becoming increasingly stressed. Nicole arguing with him behind closed doors. Bills arriving in the mail. Long conversations that stopped whenever Chloe entered the room. Dad was angry all the time, she said quietly. Not at me. Just angry. I listened carefully. Did he ever talk about me? Another pause. Sometimes. My stomach tightened. What did he say? Mostly that he was tired of everyone expecting things from him. The answer did not sound like Ryan. Or perhaps it sounded exactly like the version of Ryan I had been refusing to see. Did I do something? I asked. No, Chloe answered so quickly that I believed her immediately. Grandma, you always helped. That is why none of this makes sense. Her words stayed with me long after the conversation moved on. Before hanging up, Chloe said something that unsettled me. Dad is not okay. I frowned. What do you mean? I do not know how to explain it. Her voice dropped. He acts like he regrets something. After we ended the call, I sat alone on the porch until the sky turned orange. Then pink. Then dark blue. Chloe's words echoed through my mind. He regrets something. The next morning, I attended my weekly book club meeting at the library. Normally, our discussions centered around novels and biographies. That day, I barely heard half the conversation. My thoughts kept drifting back to Ryan. Not the man who sent the text message. The boy who once called me whenever he needed advice. The young father who brought Chloe to my house every Saturday morning so she could help me bake cookies. Somewhere between those versions of my son, something had broken. On my way home, I stopped at a grocery store. As I pushed my cart through the produce section, I heard someone call my name. Turning around, I found myself face to face with an old family friend named Steven. He and Ryan had worked together years ago. After exchanging pleasantries, Steven's expression changed. I have been meaning to ask how Ryan is doing. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Why? Steven looked surprised. You do not know? My grip tightened on the shopping cart handle. Know what? He hesitated. I thought your family would have told you. My heart began beating faster. Told me what, Steven? He glanced around before lowering his voice. Ryan left his job about 3 months ago. The world seemed to pause. What? Steven nodded slowly. Everyone assumed you knew. I stared at him in disbelief. 3 months ago. The timing hit me immediately, almost exactly when the text message arrived. Are you sure? I asked. Absolutely. He looked concerned now. I figured he was taking time off before starting something new. I thanked him, finished my shopping in a daze, and drove home. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold beside me. For the first time, the pieces began fitting together differently. The silence, the anger, the distance, Chloe's concern, and now a job loss nobody bothered to tell me about. I looked at my phone resting on the table. For 2 months, I believed Ryan's message was the end of a relationship. Now I was beginning to wonder if it had actually been the beginning of a crisis. That night, I barely slept. Steven's casual comment replayed in my mind again and again. Ryan left his job 3 months ago. The timing was impossible to ignore. 3 months ago, he lost his job. 2 months ago, he sent the message. Somewhere between those two events, something had happened that changed the course of our relationship. I sat awake in bed staring at the ceiling long after midnight, trying to understand why a son who needed support would push away one of the few people who had always been there for him. By morning, I still had no answer. I made coffee and carried it onto the back porch. The air felt cooler than it had a week earlier. Autumn was settling in. As I watched leaves drift across the yard, I found myself remembering another difficult period in Ryan's life. He was 26 when a business venture failed. He lost money, confidence, and sleep all at the same time. Back then, he called me almost every evening. Sometimes he asked for advice. Sometimes he just needed someone to listen. I never judged him. I never told him he should have known better. I simply reminded him that setbacks were not the same thing as failure. That was the version of Ryan I knew. The version who understood that asking for help was not weakness. So what had changed? Around noon, Chloe called again. This time her voice sounded slightly brighter. Grandma, are you busy? Not at all. Can I ask you something? I smiled. You already are. She laughed softly. The sound warmed my heart. Do you think people can get so embarrassed that they stop thinking clearly? The question caught me off guard. Why do you ask? A pause followed. Because Dad has been acting like that. I leaned back in my chair. Tell me what you mean. Chloe explained that after losing his job, Ryan became increasingly withdrawn. He spent hours alone in his office. He stopped meeting friends. He avoided family events. Whenever anyone asked how things were going, he insisted everything was fine. Mom tried talking to him, Chloe said. but he always got upset. What about you? I asked. He tells me not to worry. Her voice softened, which usually means there is something to worry about. I could not help smiling. She was perceptive, just like her grandfather had been. Before hanging up, Chloe shared one final detail. Grandma, there were a lot of arguments before you got that message. My stomach tightened. About what? Money, mostly. There it was. Another piece of the puzzle. After the call ended, I sat quietly for several minutes. Then I walked into my home office and opened an old file cabinet. Inside were years of records, notes, and documents. I was not looking for financial information. I was looking for perspective. Sometimes understanding the present requires revisiting the past. As I sorted through old papers, I found several handwritten notes from my late husband. One in particular caught my attention. It was a simple reminder he had written years ago during a stressful period in our lives. People often push away the ones who remind them they are struggling. I stared at those words longer than I expected. Perhaps Ryan's message had never been about me. Perhaps I represented something he did not want to face. Failure, vulnerability, need. That possibility did not erase the hurt, but it changed the shape of it. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a notification. For a split second, I hoped it was Ryan. Instead, it was a social media update. Normally, I would have ignored it. This time, I clicked. The update came from Nicole. The photograph showed her and Chloe smiling at a local school event. At first glance, it seemed ordinary. Then I noticed something in the background. Ryan stood several feet away from everyone else. Alone. His expression looked exhausted. Not angry. Not arrogant. Exhausted. I enlarged the image and studied it carefully. For the first time since receiving that message, I felt something unexpected. Concern. Genuine concern. Because whatever mistakes Ryan had made, he was clearly carrying something heavier than pride. And as I looked at that photograph, I began to suspect that the call Chloe described was getting closer. Much closer than either of us realized. The next 2 weeks passed without a single word from Ryan. No calls. No texts. No emails. If Chloe had not reached out, I might have believed he truly wanted me erased from his life. Instead, her occasional messages became small windows into a world I was no longer allowed to enter. She never shared anything cruel or dramatic. She simply described what she saw. Her father spending hours staring at a laptop. Her parents whispering late at night after they thought she was asleep. The tension that seemed to follow Ryan from room to room. One Thursday evening, after book club, I returned home to find a message waiting on my voicemail. It was not from Ryan. It was from Nicole. I listened to it twice. Her voice sounded polite but strained. Margaret, I hope you are doing well. I just wanted to check in. Please call if you would like to talk. That was all. No explanation. No mention of the message Ryan sent. No mention of the 2 months of silence. Just a careful attempt to open a door without acknowledging why it had been closed. I did not call back. Not because I was angry. Because I had finally learned the difference between responding and chasing. For years, I had chased relationships whenever they drifted away. This time, I stayed still. The following Sunday, I attended a community fundraiser organized by the library. The event was simple. Coffee, homemade desserts, and local musicians performing on a small stage. I spent most of the afternoon helping set up tables. At one point, Carol looked at me and smiled. You seem different lately. Different how? I asked. Lighter. The answer surprised me. I thought about it for a moment. Despite everything that had happened, she was right. The hurt remained, but the constant worry was gone. I was no longer structuring every day around whether Ryan might call. I was no longer measuring my worth by how often my phone rang. Somewhere during those quiet weeks, I had started rebuilding a life that belonged to me. Later that evening, Chloe called again. This time her voice sounded nervous. Grandma, can I tell you something? Of course. She lowered her voice. Dad had another interview today. My heart lifted slightly. That is good news. I thought so too. She hesitated. But when he got home, he looked upset. Did something happen? I do not know. She paused. I heard him tell Mom that nobody wants to hire someone with his recent history. I sat quietly, letting the words settle. Job loss affects more than finances. It affects identity, confidence, pride, especially for someone who has always measured success by achievement. How is he handling it? I asked. Chloe laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. Not very well. After we hung up, I found myself thinking about Ryan as a teenager. He hated asking for help. If he struggled with homework, he would spend hours trying to solve the problem alone before finally admitting he needed assistance. If he got lost while driving somewhere, he would circle the same streets repeatedly rather than stop for directions. Independence had always been one of his strengths. It was also one of his weaknesses. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail. The return address belonged to Ryan and Nicole. My pulse quickened slightly as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note from Chloe. She thanked me for always answering her calls. She told me about school. She included a photograph of a painting she had completed for an art class. At the very bottom, she added one final sentence. "I think Dad misses you, but he does not know how to say it." I read that line several times. Then I placed the letter inside a drawer beside the photographs I had been sorting earlier that summer. Outside, evening shadows stretched across my backyard. Inside, I felt something shifting again. Not because Ryan had reached out. He had not. But because the distance between us no longer felt permanent. It felt fragile, like a wall built in panic rather than conviction. And walls built in panic rarely survive forever. Exactly 61 days after Ryan's message, my phone rang at 2:07 in the morning. The sound startled me awake. For a moment, I lay still in the darkness, disoriented and confused. Then the phone rang again. I reached toward the nightstand and looked at the screen. Ryan. My heart immediately began pounding. During the previous 2 months, I had imagined this moment more times than I cared to admit. In some versions, he apologized. In others, he explained. In none of them did he call in the middle of the night. I answered on the third ring. Ryan. At first, I heard nothing. Then I heard breathing. Uneven breathing. The kind that comes when someone has been carrying too much for too long. Mom. His voice cracked on the single word. I sat upright instantly. Ryan, what happened? Silence. Then another shaky breath. I do not know what to do. The sentence landed with more force than any apology could have. For 2 months, my son had insisted he did not need me. Now he sounded like a frightened teenager calling home from a place he did not understand. I switched on the lamp beside my bed. Slow down, I said gently. Tell me what is going on. For several seconds, he could not seem to form the words. When he finally spoke, the confidence I had always associated with Ryan was gone. Everything is falling apart. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted details. Another part already knew this conversation was not really about jobs or money or whatever crisis had triggered the call. It was about reaching the point where pride finally loses its battle against reality. Are you safe? I asked. Yes. Is Nicole safe? Yes. Chloe? Yes. His answer came quickly. Relief moved through me. Whatever was happening, no one was in immediate danger. Then start from the beginning. Ryan sighed heavily. I lost another opportunity today. The words sounded rehearsed, as though he had repeated them to himself all evening. The interview? I asked. He laughed bitterly. Not just the interview. Everything. I listened quietly. Over the next several minutes, pieces of the story emerged. The job search had gone worse than expected. Savings were disappearing. Bills continued arriving. The pressure inside his home had grown unbearable. Every day brought another reminder that life was moving in the wrong direction. I thought I could fix it myself, he admitted. I kept thinking if I just worked harder, waited longer, pushed a little more, everything would turn around. The exhaustion in his voice made my chest ache. And I asked softly, and it did not. Silence filled the line. Then he said something that surprised me. I was embarrassed. I leaned back against the headboard. Embarrassed of what? Another long pause. Of needing help. The honesty caught me off guard. Ryan had spent years presenting himself as capable, successful, independent. Hearing him admit vulnerability felt almost unfamiliar. Mom, he said quietly, I think I pushed you away because every time I talked to you, I felt guilty. The confession hung between us. Guilty for what? Because you always showed up when I needed you. His voice trembled, and I could not even admit that I needed anyone. I stared into the darkness beyond the edge of the lamp light. Suddenly, so many things made sense. The anger, the distance, the text message. None of it had really been about me. It had been about a man losing control of the life he thought he was supposed to have. Ryan, I said carefully, you hurt me. I know. His answer came instantly. I know, Mom. For the first time since the message arrived, I believed he truly understood what he had done. Not because he was suffering, because he finally stopped defending it. We talked for nearly an hour. Not about solutions. Not about money. Just truth. Raw, uncomfortable truth. When the conversation finally slowed, Ryan's voice softened. There is something else. I waited. Another long silence followed. Then he said the words I had known were coming ever since the phone rang. Mom, I need you. I looked down at the phone in my hand and felt a strange mixture of sadness, relief, and compassion. 2 months earlier, he told me he did not need me anymore. Now, in the middle of the night, with his world beginning to crumble around him, he had finally found the courage to say the opposite. And for the first time since everything began, neither of us pretended otherwise. After we ended the call, I sat awake until sunrise. The house was completely silent except for the ticking clock in the hallway. My tea had gone cold beside me, untouched. For 2 months, I had imagined what I might say if Ryan ever reached out. I imagined anger. I imagined disappointment. I imagined demanding answers. Instead, all I felt was sadness. Not because he needed help, because he had suffered alone for so long before finally admitting it. Around 7 o'clock that morning, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Ryan. Thank you for answering. I stared at those 3 words longer than I should have. Then another message appeared. I did not think you would. My heart tightened. The realization that my son genuinely feared I would reject him revealed how far apart we had drifted. I replied simply, I am still your mother. Several minutes passed before he answered. I know. The response seemed small, but I sensed something important behind it. For the first time in months, Ryan was speaking honestly. Later that afternoon, I drove to a small diner near the edge of town. Ryan suggested meeting there because it was quiet and unlikely to be crowded. When I arrived, he was already sitting in a booth near the back window. The moment I saw him, I understood why Chloe had been worried. He looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. His shoulders slumped forward as though he were carrying an invisible weight. This was not the confident man who once believed he could solve every problem alone. This was someone who had finally reached the limits of endurance. Hi, Mom, he said softly. Hi, Ryan. For a moment, neither of us knew what to do. Then he stood and hugged me. The embrace lasted only a few seconds, but it said more than words could have. We sat down across from each other. A waitress brought coffee and left us alone. Ryan wrapped both hands around the mug without drinking. I owe you an explanation. I nodded but remained silent. He took a deep breath. After I lost my job, I told myself it was temporary. I thought I would find another one quickly. He laughed bitterly. Then weeks became months. I listened carefully. The more things got worse, the more embarrassed I became. Every interview felt like a judgment. Every rejection felt personal. His eyes drifted toward the window. I started avoiding people, including me. The words were not accusatory, just true. Ryan nodded immediately. Especially you. That answer surprised me. Why? He looked down at the table. Because you always believed in me. The statement sounded strange until he continued. And every time I talked to you, I felt like I was letting you down. The honesty in his voice made it difficult to stay angry. Not because what he did was acceptable, because I finally understood it. Ryan had not pushed me away because he stopped caring. He pushed me away because he could not bear being seen during the worst chapter of his life. So you sent that message instead. He winced visibly. I know. Do you? I asked quietly. Because those words mattered. Ryan nodded slowly. I know they did. His voice cracked. And I regret them every day. Silence settled between us. Outside, cars moved steadily through the parking lot. Inside, years of misunderstanding sat across the table from one another. Finally, Ryan spoke again. The truth is, Mom, when everything started falling apart, I expected certain people to help. I studied his face carefully, and they disappeared. The answer came without hesitation. Friends stopped calling. Professional contacts stopped responding. People who once praised his success suddenly became unavailable. I spent so much time trying to prove I did not need anyone that I forgot who had actually been there all along. I looked down at my coffee. Sometimes life teaches lessons more effectively than any parent ever could. Before we left the diner, Ryan reached into his pocket and handed me something folded neatly in half. It was a printed copy of the text message he had sent 2 months earlier. Across the bottom, written in pen, were 4 words. I was completely wrong. I stared at the paper for a long time. Then I folded it and placed it inside my purse. Not because the apology erased the pain, because it acknowledged it. As we walked toward our cars, Ryan stopped beside me. Mom. Yes. His eyes filled with emotion. I thought losing my job was the worst thing that happened this year. He paused. Now I realize losing you would have been worse. Over the next several weeks, something unexpected happened. Ryan stopped trying to convince me that everything was fine. For years, that had been his habit. He would smile through problems, minimize struggles, and insist he had everything under control. Now, for the first time in his adult life, he began speaking honestly. Sometimes honesty arrived through short phone calls, sometimes through text messages, sometimes through long conversations that lasted well into the evening. One Sunday afternoon, he came over carrying a cardboard box. "What is this?" I asked as he set it on my dining room table. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Stuff from my office." I opened the box and found notebooks, folders, old business plans, and framed certificates. The contents looked less like a career and more like a collection of abandoned dreams. Ryan stared at the box for a moment before speaking. "I spent years building an image." I looked up. "An image?" He nodded. "Successful. Independent. In control." He laughed softly. "The funny thing is, I became so focused on protecting that image that I stopped taking care of myself." His words reminded me of something his father once said. Pride often disguises itself as strength until life forces it into the open. During that visit, Ryan admitted something else. Several people he considered close friends disappeared after he lost his job. Invitations stopped arriving. Phone calls stopped coming. Promises of support vanished. "I thought they cared about me," he said quietly. "Maybe they cared about who I was when things were going well." I did not respond immediately. Some lessons are painful because nobody can learn them for you. A few days later, Chloe visited after school. She looked happier than she had in months. We spent the afternoon baking cookies together, something we had not done in a long time. As we worked, she told me her father seemed different. "He talks more now," she said while decorating sugar cookies. "About what?" "Real things." She smiled. "Not just work." That observation stayed with me. Losing his job had hurt Ryan deeply, but it had also stripped away certain illusions. For the first time, he was allowing people to see him as he really was instead of who he thought he needed to be. Then came the conversation that changed everything. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening. Ryan called and asked if he could stop by. When he arrived, he looked nervous. Not defeated. Nervous. We sat in the living room while rain tapped softly against the windows. After several minutes of silence, he took a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I wrote something," he said. "For you." I accepted it carefully. The letter was only 2 pages long. Yet it contained more honesty than I had heard from him in years. He wrote about fear, about pride, about losing his job, about feeling like a failure. Most importantly, he wrote about the text message. "The worst mistake was not losing my job," one sentence read. "The worst mistake was pushing away the person who never measured my value by my success." By the time I finished reading, tears filled my eyes. Not because the letter erased the hurt. It did not. Words cannot erase consequences, but they can reveal growth. And growth was exactly what I saw. Ryan looked at me anxiously. "I know I cannot undo what I said." I folded the letter carefully. "No, you cannot." He nodded. "I figured." Then I smiled gently. "But you can decide who you become after it." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain continued falling outside. Finally, Ryan let out a long breath. It sounded like someone setting down a heavy burden after carrying it far too long. In that moment, I realized something important. The real change was not that Ryan needed me again. The real change was that he finally understood why he needed people at all. And that understanding was worth far more than any apology. Life did not return to the way it was before. That was perhaps the most important lesson of all. Too many people imagine reconciliation as a return to the past. But the past was exactly what brought us to that painful place in the first place. What happened instead was something better. We built something new. The months that followed brought small changes rather than dramatic ones. Ryan eventually found a new position with a company that valued his experience. The salary was lower than his previous job, but for the first time in years he seemed genuinely grateful simply to have meaningful work. He no longer measured success by titles or paychecks. He measured it by peace of mind. Chloe noticed the difference before anyone else. One Saturday afternoon, she sat with me on my porch swing, eating homemade cookies. "Dad smiles more now," she said. I smiled back. "That is a good sign." She nodded thoughtfully. "He listens more too." The observation made me laugh softly. Some people spend decades learning what humility can teach in a single difficult season. A few weeks later, Ryan invited me to dinner at his house. It was the first invitation that felt completely natural since everything happened. No guilt, no obligation, just a son wanting to spend time with his mother. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt different, lighter. Nicole greeted me warmly. Chloe practically dragged me inside to show me a school project she had been working on. Even the house itself seemed calmer. During dinner, Ryan stood up unexpectedly and tapped his glass with a spoon. "I want to say something," he said. The room grew quiet. He looked directly at me. "This year taught me a lesson I should have learned a long time ago." He paused. "The people who truly love you are not always the people who tell you what you want to hear. They are the people who stay when everything falls apart." My eyes filled with tears before I could stop them. Ryan shook his head and smiled. "I spent months thinking I had to prove I could do everything alone." He laughed softly. "Turns out I was proving the wrong thing." The room relaxed. Conversation resumed. But I never forgot those words. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were cleaned, Ryan walked me to my car. The air was cool and crisp. Autumn leaves covered parts of the driveway. We stood there for a moment without speaking. Then he reached into his wallet and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I recognized it immediately. The printed copy of the text message he had shown me months earlier. "I do not need this anymore," he said. He handed it to me. Across the bottom, beneath the words he had written before, he had added another sentence. "Thank you for answering anyway." I looked at him and saw not the frightened man who called at 2 in the morning, nor the angry man who sent the message. I saw my son, imperfect, humbled, wiser than he had been before. And perhaps that was enough. When I returned home that night, I opened the drawer where I kept family letters and photographs. I placed the paper inside next to Chloe's card and the old notes from my husband. Then I closed the drawer and stood quietly in the living room. My phone rested on the coffee table. Months earlier, I spent every day staring at it, hoping for a message that never came. Now it was simply a phone again. The fear was gone. The waiting was gone. What remained was something stronger. Understanding. Looking back, I realized the most painful part of the entire experience was never the text message itself. It was what the message convinced me to believe. For a while, I thought it meant I was no longer needed, no longer important, no longer valued. The truth turned out to be very different. Ryan did not push me away because I lacked value. He pushed me away because he could not face his own. And when life stripped away the illusion that he could handle everything alone, he finally remembered something I had known all along. Needing people is not weakness. It is part of being human. Sometimes the people we love hurt us. Sometimes pride blinds them. Sometimes fear convinces them to make terrible choices. But growth begins the moment truth becomes more important than ego. On that quiet evening, as I switched off the lights and prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Ryan. Only 4 words. "Love you, Mom." I smiled, set the phone on the nightstand, and turned out the light. This time, I did not need to stare at the screen. I already knew he meant it.